my children, they were little, but I'm on the hospice mission. My father is elderly, and I'm just coming to check in on his affairs, you know. So in the process, I had a chat with his nurse this morning, and she's country and quaint, right? Both in her, you know, her demeanor and what I was able to discern from talking to her 5 minutes. That's how she presents herself. That's how she sees herself. She's quaint and simple, you know. But it didn't take long for me to see how complicated she actually is, in spite of the way she wants to present herself and the way she probably sees herself, her persona otherwise. Very simple, but in reality, she's very complicated. And it made me think about the reality of being a human being. We are so much more complicated than we think we are. And it makes it difficult for us to formulate relationships and sustain relationships with people, precisely because we are so much more complicated than we think. And the lesson, however, is that for us as Americans, and this is it transcends, you know, nationality, but I just like to speak to what I know best. We have increasingly lost sight of the fact that we ultimately need to be captured. We need to allow ourselves to be captured. We need another person, and particularly, but in general, other people, to cut through all the complexities and difficulties that we put up to protect ourselves. And so what I want you to take away from this lesson is that you don't win by being inaccessible. You don't win by being adept at creating all this complexity and impossibility when it comes to somebody else cracking the code. You want and you need someone to be able to get in there, right? That's how you win, by being captured, is by, you know, that's how you win ultimately. And so in the folklore and the mythology, these are the stories that you've heard about the princess, the beautiful princess, and her father is the king, and her father creates these riddles and these challenges for her suitors. And sometimes the suitor who wins the princess's hand is otherwise a clown, a buffoon. Other times he could be a hunter, right? And in the case of Yoruba mythology, or Yoruba, the Odu Ifa, sacred text that we adhere to, it turns out to be, at least in the most notorious example that I know, it's Oromila, who's the one who's wise enough to cut through the difficulties that the princess has put into place. And one example comes from Ogbeyonu, where all these deities want to marry the princess of Iwo, and all the divinities fail. Ogun tries, Obatala tries, Eshu tries, but none of them can muster the patience necessary to stay with this princess, except for Oromila. And here I'm going to draw from the work of Sigmund Freud in particular, who gives us, I'm going to combine actually two schools of thought. You got Freud, who gave us the id, the ego, and the superego. You guys probably remember this from your high school psychology class, right? The id is that wild, primitive, ungovernable aspect of your consciousness. The id is savage, you know? And then you got the ego, which is rational. The ego is logical. The ego is reasonable. The ego is the one that puts things in order and puts the id in check. And then you got the superego. The superego is above it all. The superego is your conscience. Your superego is concerned with what's right, what's best. And so in the story that I just told, which is plays out many, many times, I've heard that story told in a Russian folk tale. I've heard it told as a Mexican folk tale, a Spanish folk tale. But in either case, the motif is very similar. The id is represented by the princess, and you really see this in Ogbeyonu. The princess is wild; she's ungovernable, right? The princess of Iwo is a troublemaker, right? And the ego is represented by the suitor, the prince, the hunter, or the wise sage, Oromila. And then the superego is represented by the king. So the king knows that it's not going to be okay if the princess doesn't have a husband. But he's got to stage it in such a way that he can find the best mate for her. So what does he do? He creates this contest, knowing that somebody's going to show up and rise to the occasion. So that's how we're looking at, the grafting of psychological concepts onto mythological frameworks, right? But the thing that we learn from, applying the mythology to a psychological filter, or applying the psychological filter to the mythology, is that all of the characters are within you. You are the king. That's your superego. You are the ego. You are the prince or the suitor, and you are the princess, which is the id. And so the super ego is putting you into situations wherein you truly need to be conquered. You need to have somebody figure out how you work. You need it. It's essential. It's integral to your becoming whole. And so the lesson, the real kernel of the lesson, is that you yourself have to put yourself into circumstances where you allow yourself to be figured out. You have figured out yourself enough to know that you need to be figured out, right? That's the only way you're going to win in the game of life, right? That's the only way you win in the game of life. You have to figure out yourself well enough to know that you need to be figured out, all right? And so this is a lesson for the leaders. You got to know this about yourself, and you got to know this about people as well, and make it easy and make it acceptable for people to be figured out. I've seen this borne out many times with my students, who possess so much brilliance. It's so much talent, so much ability, but part of my job is to just see them and to be able to discern what's underneath all the deflection, what's underneath all the defense mechanisms, right? Those are the walls that we put up for a variety of reasons. And many times just being able to see that there is this spark of brilliance behind the facade is enough to give me enough patience to create learning experiences that would allow that person to figure out themselves a little bit more, right? And then as we develop relationships, people say, "Oh yeah, it's okay if you figure me out, Baba. I'm cool with you figuring me out. I like you knowing how I tick, because that's how I can take you further. If I can't get past the walls, I can't take you further. You know what I mean? It's just, that's the way it is. That's why I say you don't win, right? You gotta let go of this idea that you're always protecting yourself from everybody all the time. That is an outdated, obsolete frame of mind that's born out of our early childhood, probably, where we were defenseless and we couldn't defend ourselves, we couldn't protect ourselves, and so we had to come up with all these different defense mechanisms. But you're an adult now. And you need help, you need support, you need guidance. And the only way that's going to happen is if you make yourself accessible. So you're going to be okay. Trust your judgment, trust your intuition. Trust the people who you have chosen to work with to guide you and support you, and you know what I mean, and to help you to get to the next level again and again and again, because the surrender is not a one-shot deal. It's not a one and done. You got to keep doing it over and over and over and over and over. You've got to allow somebody in order to keep guiding you and keep elevating you and taking you to higher and higher levels. So if you're someone who is really predisposed to letting down those walls so that you can go higher and go further, you want to improve the world through positive influence, I want you to find out how Oloye Obafemi Origuwa and the Orisha Lifestyle Academy can help you take your practice and your life to the highest level possible. Visit me at obafemio.com or orishalifestyle.com, and let's start doing what we need to do to help you live the medicine that will heal your life and heal the lives of those who you're destined to serve. I look forward to working with you. Bye for now. Odabo.